Hi, everyone. My name is Veronica,
And my name's David.
and we are both ombudspersons in the Office of the Student Ombuds at the University of Alberta. Every year, our office celebrates Fairness Day to bring awareness to the critical role of fairness in the different processes and procedures at the university. Many of the students that are coming to our office are ultimately led here because of some perceived lack of fairness, whether that's in their coursework, in some kind of formal decision-making process, or in the way that they've been treated by another member of the university community. And as ombuds, we are using a fairness lens to work with students to help them identify their options within the university context to address these issues. So as part of the video that we've created today, we will outline the different types of fairness that we are attending to in our ombudsing work. And then we will do a little role play to try and show how relational fairness in particular impacts the perception of fairness in people's experiences.
So really quickly before we get started, I'm going to outline a couple different types of fairness. With the ombuds, we actually see fairness as a multifaceted thing, and there's kind of four main types of fairness that we look at. The first is procedural fairness, which is how was something decided? Was it decided according to the right procedures, the right policies, were the right steps taken and the right people involved? The next one is substantive fairness, which is the what was decided. Did the person making the decision have the authority to make that decision? Is it a decision that is fair with the situation at hand? And is the decision one that can actually be enacted based on the circumstances? The third is equitable fairness. Now, equitable fairness is kind of demonstrating that fairness is not sameness. One situation and one sanction is going to have a very different impact on two different people because of a lot of different factors in their life. So when we look at fairness, we look at procedural, how was something decided, substantive, what was decided, and equitable, was an individual's situation taken into account, and was it seen in a broader picture? But we also look at relational fairness, and I'll pass it off to Veronica to talk more about that.
Yeah, so relational fairness stands distinctly from the other types of fairness in that it's normally not as obvious in terms of what happened that led someone to feel unfairly treated if a relational fairness component is missing, but it majorly influences our perception of whether we've been fairly treated or not. So relational fairness stands apart from the other three types of fairness in that it plays a huge part in how we feel or how we perceive to be fairly treated, but it's harder to identify. So it's easy, for example, with procedural fairness to identify that a particular step in a process was not followed. It's easy also to identify whether the person making a decision at the university has the correct authority to do so. But it's a lot harder to identify what happened in a situation when relational fairness is missing, because it's something that influences more so the perception of feeling fairly treated rather than being an observable, objective component of a process that's missing.
In this video, we're going to go over two different scenarios. One where a student has handed in an assignment past the deadline and goes to discuss with their professor to see what can be done. And the first example of it is going to be one where relational fairness isn't fully present. The next example will be one where we can say relational fairness is there. Now, after that, we're going to kind of discuss what the difference going into and out of each of those scenarios would be and how that will have a different impact on the people involved.
Now, relational fairness has to do with how someone is treated throughout a process. So this has to do with whether they feel that they've been heard, how they've been listened to, whether they feel that their input is valued or taken into account, whether they feel that they've had a chance to express their side of the story. And that's what makes it more ambiguous and less easy to identify or to know when it's present or when it's not. But we're hoping that these scenarios that we are planning to show you today will make it a little bit more obvious in terms of when relational fairness is present or is absent. All right, so in the first scenario here, David will be playing a student that is going to their professor to talk about an assignment that they weren't able to submit by the deadline. And I will be playing said professor. Now, in this first scenario, I will be acting without emphasizing relational fairness, and then we will do it again where I am trying to include relational fairness as part of this demonstration.
Dr. Taylor, I am so sorry. Can I just have a quick seconds? I wanted to talk to you about the assignment that I submitted last night. I know it was a little bit late, but I just wanted to see, like, is there anything that can be done? I put a lot of effort into it. I know it's worth a decent chunk.
If you miss the deadline, there's nothing that can be done. The syllabus clearly stated that there was no excuse for late assignments, and I have a zero tolerance policy.
It was only a couple minutes too, though. Like, I think I submitted at like 12:03. Is there anything, like, even a way to get partial marks or anything?
No, it was very clearly written that there was a zero tolerance policy for any late assignments. So unfortunately, I can't accept your assignment.
Not, I put in so much work on that thing too. Like, I spent hours on it.
There's a zero tolerance policy. I can't tell you any different. So I don't think this is going to go anywhere. I need to start our lecture this morning.
Okay, thank you.
And see.
Dr. Taylor, do we have a quick second? I wanted to talk to you about the assignment that I submitted last night. I know it was a little bit late, but is there anything I can do to still, like, get partial marks or anything?
Oh, David, I'm sorry about that. What was going on last night that you managed to miss the deadline?
My cats were just up and down the hall screaming. They were just, I think one of them had something a little off with them, so lost track of time trying to take care of them. So I just didn't really know until it was too late. And I only submitted it a couple minutes late. So I think, like, it's not that I had too long afterwards.
Yeah, I know it was really close to the deadline. Unfortunately, we do have the policy in the syllabus that is a zero tolerance policy for any late assignments. And that's ultimately because it is then makes it impossible to gauge at which point it's acceptable to allow for the late assignments, whether it's a minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And so that policy is really in place for all students to make sure that they're given the same standard, the same deadline to submit their assignments by.
I guess that makes sense. I did put in quite a lot of work for this, and it was
Yeah.
a really big assignment. Is there even, like, a way I could get feedback on it? Because I know this is going to build into the stuff later down in the course.
Yeah, so you could definitely get some feedback on the assignment. I know how much work you were putting in, and so I would be happy to give you some feedback so that you can use it for the next upcoming assignment. I just won't be able to accept it for the purposes of this deadline submission.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks for explaining that too. I know it's not the best in my situation because I still miss out on it, but it makes sense, and I really do appreciate the feedback as well.
Yes, I'll be sure and get that to you so that you can use it for the next component of the assignment.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So, seeing both those scenarios back to back, what kind of comes to mind for you as the biggest difference between them?
In between those two scenarios, the biggest difference I would say is that in the first instance, the professor kept emphasizing the policy. So they didn't really show that they had wanted anything to do with hearing what the student had to say about what was going on for them. They basically just broken record style kept repeating the policy that there was no exceptions for the late assignment, that it wouldn't be accepted. So there was no acknowledgement of where the student was coming from in the situation or what had happened for them. Whereas in the second scenario, there was more of a sort of wondering about what had happened for the student and still emphasizing the same policy. So the outcome in both situations is the same. However, the treatment by the professor toward the student in the second scenario is a lot more empathic, acknowledging where the student might have been coming from, or at least curious about what had happened, and then empathizing with them about the seriousness or the loss essentially of not being able to count an assignment, because that's a big deal to not have an assignment contributing toward your mark.
Yeah, no, I think that's a lot of what I picked out too. I definitely think in the first scenario, as the student, I very much felt brushed off. I understood that the policy was there. I understood that the situation was there. But in the second situation, the professor was very open to hear what happened. And even though the policy was still there, even though functionally the same outcome took place, it was a lot more supportive. There was an interest in what happened. There was an interest to see if we could come to an alternative solution that would still allow me to benefit from the work I had put on the assignment. So I think looking at them both back to back, the biggest thing on my end was it felt a lot better in the second one, even though at the end of the day, I got the 0 on both of those assignments. Knowing that the professor there was actually interested in what was going on, actually wanted to know how they could help, and was looking for a way to not break the policy or get around the policy, to enforce the policy, but still provide feedback, still provide a formative situation rather than a summative situation.
I think you've summed it up nicely.
Yeah. So hopefully today you learned a little bit more about fairness, and our scenarios were able to show you a bit of how relational fairness can interact with that, where it's not always about what decisions are made, how it's made, or what factors into it, but also how people are treated throughout it.
Yeah, so as a student, paying attention to whether your sense of unfairness is related to how you've been treated or something that occurred in the process. Because when it comes to appeal processes available at the university, they are often more dependent on there being some kind of issue of procedural, substantive, or equitable fairness, whereas relational fairness is not as often grounds for appeal. However, noticing like where that perception of unfairness is coming from can help you to identify what options are then worth pursuing, or what next steps are fitting for your situation.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you learned some valuable information about relational fairness. Once again, my name is David.
And my name is Veronica.
Have a fantastic Fairness Day. Bye.